I'll give your theory in another way.
I love it.
Negativity attracts negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more negative I have in me, the more negative I project, right? And so, the more positivity I have in me, the more positivity I project. And our society is just on a negative energetic cycle. And it's accumulated over many generations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just this massive amount of negative energy that is unconscious. People do not realize that they're perpetuating negativity, that they're harming and they're hurting people, that the very words coming out of their mouth are casting spells upon good people.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't understand it. And so, it's the fact that we have an unconscious society. And you're absolutely right. It does feel good when you have not realized your full potential to try to limit someone else from realizing theirs.
Mm-hmm.
The lower vibrational individual will always try to pull down the higher vibrational individual. And as higher vibrational individuals, we have to try to pull up the lower vibrational individuals. There's been an awakening that's occurring where more people have awakened to higher levels of consciousness, where we can truly live a positive life filled with joy, happiness, love, light, and beauty. We don't have to live a life filled with gossip and grief and shame and apathy and
welcome Ryan Blair to our Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you for having me.
So Ryan, let's just start by saying you are the real deal. I have watched you continue to flourish over the past couple of years that I have known you. And we're going to talk all about all the things that have happened and taken place in your life. And you have been on this tremendous healing journey for yourself and have also been generous enough to found an incredible company by the name of Altar Call, where you're also bringing people along the path, along the journey toward their own healing with you. Yeah. So
that's pretty much, once you get to a certain level of healing, you can no longer spend, 10 hours a day healing yourself. You have to do something with your time. And I chose to, share what I had learned with others.
Amazing. So we can't wait to hear all about that, more about that work that you're doing. But in the meantime, before we sort of dive in there, you have been on this tremendous journey as an entrepreneur. I remember when I had a friend who was staying at your home, and so I was visiting your house, and I remember we were in the kitchen, and you like pointed out the window to this big like cell phone tower, and you were like, I built that cell phone tower. And I was like, that's nice. Like I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
And then later on, I got to learn more about your story. And so you sold your business by Salis for $7.92.4 million.
792 million.
No 0.4 there.
Well, there's a 0.4. 0.4 is very important. Yeah, 792 million.
I mean, that 0.4 is the difference between some folks paying their bills and
it is. Right? Yeah, when you're talking about the numbers of your achievements, you have to be very specific down to the detail, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, was that your life stream to do that?
Yeah, was it my life's dream? My life's dream was very outwardly oriented. So outward success was my life's dream. And that's a product of the fact that I had a very terrible environment that I was raised in. And so as a result of that, I wanted something different than what I had been born into. Mm-hmm. And I thought that outward success was going to, to give me that, because outward success, we didn't have that growing up. We had anything but that. And so I thought that was the missing link. If I just had a bunch of money, a bunch of status, and some notoriety, that I would be super happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you want to share with us a little bit about what that environment was like for you growing up, what that looked and felt like?
Sure. The best way to describe it would be that my parents just operated at a low level of consciousness. They were involved in drugs, alcohol. My father was very violent. My mother was an alcoholic, and she had suffered a lot of trauma growing up in the way she was raised, and he had suffered a lot of trauma growing up in the way he was raised. And so, they were a mess, a lovely mess. And
Lovely mess.
yeah, a lovely mess. Well, it wasn't lovely, but I see it now as lovely because they gave me the exact chemistry that I needed to be the man that I am today. And I'm grateful for everything about them, even their flaws. But it was a violent, scary situation to be raised in. I had to worry about survival and my security and fear at a very early age. And then my father would leave at 12. Or no, he started getting really addicted to drugs at around 12. And he was out of my life by the time I was 14. I was on my own at 13, and I last saw him at 14. So as a young man that was very competitive, very sports oriented type of young man, had a lot of anger in me that was passed to me from my father. I then got involved in gangs and, turned to the streets and turned to role models on the streets that recruited me and that attempted to guide me in their way of life, which required me to do crime and perpetuate violence. So that was how I was raised up until I was 17 years old. And then at 17, my mother found me a mentor, and it changed my life completely. It changed my perspective on life. And, he loved my mother. And so he took me in and my mother in, and our lives changed from living in poverty to now all of a sudden I was part of the wealthy class. And although I wasn't, I was 17, so it wasn't as though my identity was of the wealthy class. My address was now of the wealthy class. So my identity was still built upon the upbringing that I had, but all of a sudden I had this new opportunity for a new identity to now leave behind my old ways and adopt some new ways. And I decided to become an entrepreneur shortly after observing my stepfather and his environment.
What an amazing story. What an amazing story. Do you want to talk for a minute, Ryan? I think it's really powerful what you shared about this idea of like the beautiful mess, or upon reflection, or in retrospect, right? This quote, I can't remember who said it, but the idea that, life is lived forwards, but often understood backwards.
Yeah.
There's so many people, myself included, by the way, who are at some point on that journey of grappling with acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and appreciation for that beautiful mess, and getting to that place where we can say exactly what you said, which is, I can see now why that was the exact sort of chemistry that I needed in my formation. But let's talk for a moment about what's been the journey for you to get there, right? In the spirit of allowing others to learn from your experience.
The journey to get there, well, I really got there when I lost my mother. I had created an identity and and played to my strengths, and it built a lot of success. And I sought attention by the opinion of others nonstop. I was really driven by the outside world. And when my mother had passed away in an interesting series of events. She first fell down a flight of stairs and she was in a coma for 2 years. And then through a lot of prayer and a miracle, she woke up from that coma right as I was about to remove her from life support. And then she was alive in a very handicapped situation for a period of about 4 years after that. So a little over 6 years, I was dealing with a severe amount of trauma. I had never really healed and reconciled the difficulties that I had in my childhood with my mother prior to that. And so I had just kind of pushed them out and pursued success, or rather probably pushed them down and pursued success. And when my mother passed away, it was a spiritual moment where all of a sudden everything started just flashing before my eyes, and I started realizing the person I had become. And I was disappointed in who that person was. I felt as though my mother could now see me completely in her transition state. And I felt as though I had a whole lot of reconciliation to do, and a lot of shame and guilt and who I had been and the decisions that I had made. And when my mother passed away, all of that started coming up. It was as close to what we call an ego death, where you just truly see who you are. And in my spiritual beliefs, I believe that she was there surfacing all of this negativity because now she could see it clearly. And I had made a deal with her during her transition that, upon her transition, her and I would be working together to do some good in the world. And so I feel like I had her presence there helping elevate me during that time. And so all of the dark surfaced at once in a variety of different ways. And it was nonstop for months on end that I had the dark surfacing. And from that point, I knew I was going through a transformation and that it was happening for a reason. And so that was the seeds that were being planted, all of these dark moments, this, what people might call spiritual warfare, or the shadow in psychological terms, just started emerging and becoming very apparent to me. So that was the beginning of the journey of going internal and of understanding consciousness.
That's beautiful. And have there been any particular tools or resources or practices that you might recommend for people as they're starting that journey, in the middle of that journey, seeing the light at the tunnel, in the darkness, that allowed you to sort of shift your mindset from being one of anger and disappointment and maybe regret or guilt or shame to one of, I can see now sort of the beauty and the plan in this mess?
Yeah, it was messy. Transformation is messy, and that's the thing that I need to share with everyone. And enlightenment, the idea of going to a place of enlightenment where you start to have an understanding of your ego and you start to understand who you are, is very messy. It is not a pretty process. So it was a very messy situation for a good year of my life. And during that year, I isolated myself from my old friends, from my business ventures. I basically detached from all of the things that I once was attached to. And that was very expensive. That cost me many millions of dollars. It cost me relationships. It was very difficult to do, but I knew that I had to, go to zero. I had to remove the board seats, the investments, the activities, the business work, the distractions, the escapism. I had to remove all of that. And so I did that. Plus I was facing a bunch of lawsuits at the time as well. So I had these external stresses on me, and I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to financially make it. I'm blessed to have earned a fair amount of income, and I had nice things and a nice house, and I wasn't sure how I was going to get through having about $1 billion of lawsuits facing me. And that was a product of running a publicly traded company, some of my own mistakes, and some of the facts of just being a very large company and the CEO of one is going to attract a lot of lawsuits from a lot of different sources because you're a prime target. And so I had all of those pressures again, pushing on me. And, I sought counseling in the past, but didn't really connect to me. I'd sought spiritual mentorship in the past, and that did connect to me. And so I decided that during this journey, I was going to go deep into spirituality. So that would be the first modality. And I studied a number of different practices. One was I studied Buddhism. I come from a Christian background, so I studied, my Christian background and beliefs and understanding of those, and revisited a lot of my beliefs and understandings. I went into Hinduism. I went into Kabbalah. I went into a bunch of different practices to try to extract what are the spiritual practices that I could find that were consistent among the different traditions. From there, I started studying meditation, and that became a big change in me, or a big change maker within me. And I went deeply into meditation for a period of, I would say, hours a day, many hours a day, many days, every day a week, every day. Went deeply into nature and my understanding of nature. I went deeply into breath work and utilized that to release emotionally stored energy. And another modality that I really went deep into, which I'm still deep into now, and the concept of resilience has been the number one thing that I have done that has created resilience in me mentally, spiritually, and physically. And that is vocal work, learning to sing. And you wouldn't believe it, but I had a terrible voice. I was terrible at singing. I wouldn't even sing happy birthday, and I would lip sync in church. And so something gravitated me to this idea that I would learn to sing during this whole period of time. And so singing is one of the very hardest things to learn to do. And it requires a whole lot of mental, physical, and in my case, spiritual changes to do so. And so the main modalities that I practiced were prayer, meditation, breath work, and vocal work. And that started changing me from the inside outward. It changed me on the physical. And when I started changing my biology physically, it started changing my behavior. And that, became the recipe that I kept repeating and repeating. And that's the recipe that I share with the people that I'm working that are, dealing with deep trauma, grief, and challenges as I was.
Such a beautiful encapsulation of your journey. It's easy for me as I listen to your story to sort of make learning to sing synonymous with this idea of finding your voice.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that resonates for you or how it resonates for you.
Well, it is. And when you really think about learning to sing, it's expressing your soul. And, there's two things that we are generally afraid of the most in our Western society. And one is public speaking. The other is public singing. I learned to publicly speak so I could express my soul that way, but it wasn't complete. To really express my soul, I needed to know my voice. I needed to understand the range of which that I could speak, and I needed to understand this anatomy. But when you actually start to work on the physiological aspects of developing your voice, you release stored energy. Your body stores energy. We know this scientifically. In other traditions, they call it chakras, and the medical practices, they call it nerve plexus. But when we store our energy, when we bite our tongue, when we have that lump in our throat because we don't share our voice and speak our truth, it just stores. We store our stress in the back of our neck. And I was a walking mess when it came to stress. So by learning to sing, it opened up my throat. It opened up the energy internally. And we know that sound waves actually are healing. And there's plenty of studies that have been done on external sound waves. And so I just went deeply into internal sound waves, because when you're singing, you're emitting these sound waves internally. And so, I was doing both external sound work and then internal sound work.
We'll edit this part out, but I have like the landscapers right outside. Just like muting.
I was wondering why you're going back and forth with mute. And I was like, hey, she's very. That's all right. I have landscapers too, and I have a bird that might chime in.
I like just the moment when you're like talking about like finding your voice and like overcoming the noise. I'm like.
Yeah, but it didn't affect my flow, and I couldn't hear it from my end.
I figured. So they're right next to the window, but they should
They should move in it.
To be gone shortly.
We'll send some mental energy to
Yes,
inspire them to
yes.
move quickly.
And we thank them for their leaf removal and
Yeah.
all of the pretty things that we appreciate that,
Yeah.
that they do
I,
for the yard.
I have, I used to do these daily meditations, as you recall, excuse me, and I had thousands of people joining me. And sure enough, like during the meditation, there was this neighbor that was cutting like concrete, like it was the most loudest, obnoxious, and it would just go off during the whole meditation. And I'd just be sitting there saying, okay, this is training me to really learn how to meditate and learn how to lead a meditation. That I'm not going to allow, a concrete saw to interrupt this meditation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm such a believer in the fact that those things are put in our path. Whether we recognize it or not at the moment as an opportunity to go deeper into our practice or trust ourselves more deeply, or
yeah, it is everything. Every challenge is, is even the small ones that like you stub your toe, like that's an opportunity to become more mindful. It's, when you start to really see the beauty and the divine craftsmanship or architecture that's occurring, it's really funny. I had an experience yesterday where I've been teaching people to think of spirituality as a video game, in particular the video game Super Mario Brothers. And I was at lunch with a person talking to them about Super Mario Brothers, and drawing the parallel between the levels and the challenges. And I walk out and there's this guy playing the Super Mario Brothers song in the middle of the street. And I'm just like, this is like, the universe has a sense of humor, no doubt about it.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah, it does.
It really does.
When you start to really see the sense of humor, it becomes a lot more fun.
It does. It does. Sometimes I'm like, not funny, the universe. Like, that is not my sense of humor.
Yeah, right. That's beautiful.
You think this is hilarious. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I got it quickly on video. I was like, I cannot believe this. There's, and it was funny. It was in Venice Beach, and the guy was in a Mario Kart with speakers blasting, driving straight down the street, as I had just given, a full dissertation on my video game theory, basically.
I like it. Well, have you seen the TED Talks by, I can't think of her last name, but her first name, but her last name is McGonigal.
No, but I'm going to take a note on this. McGonigal.
Yeah, McGonigal. Her TED Talks are like in the top 10, typically, I think. And she talks about using, I'm not sure if this is related to your thesis, but she talks about video games and virtual reality as being the key to making our reality better. That if we can go into virtual reality and kind of practice, then we can show up in the 3D world, if you will.
Interesting.
Yeah. And she also has another one about like harnessing stress, and that like stress isn't necessarily bad for you, that stress gets a bad rap. Her talks have been really popular.
Check it out. There's a lot of work on, there's a few people in the AI world that tell you that we are operating in a video game, that the degree that soon in our evolution, our video games and our real life will be imperceivable, the difference between the two. That if you look at the rate of progression in video game technology, that at some point in the not too far out future, it will be, we will not be able to perceive the difference. And so the idea is that maybe some civilization a long time ago created a video game that we are literally being operated in right now as we speak. And we're just players in the game. So it's, there's some interesting theory that's emerging on this subject as we get closer to, that convergence between virtual reality and, with what's going on with Meta and everything that everybody's shifting toward right now as we speak. It looks like we're heading toward, merging with the actual video game that we've been a part of in the first place.
That's fascinating. Have you and your son watched Ready Player One?
Yes. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I just hope that it doesn't turn out to be, such that humanity doesn't lose its way by this metaverse.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So Ryan, if you were to sort of reflect on the arc of the trajectory of your life, and you might have already have started to touch on this, is there a particular challenge or a particular experience that you think that has significantly formed or informed the person that I am today?
The most impactful event was, as I mentioned earlier, the passing of my mother, and I call it a transition, but I didn't understand the spiritual transition at that time. So the first experience of that experience was one of grief and sorrow and loss, and to the point where it feels as though your umbilical cord was ripped out all over again. It's a physical feeling. I've never cried so hard in my life. I've never hurt so much in my life. I've never been so angry. I've never had, so much emotion arise at once. Now, there are a number of other events that were pivotal in the trajectory of my life. And prior to my mother's passing, there's some good events that occurred, as well as getting my first mentor. I was starved of a mentor. And, the analogy I like to use is like, if you imagine starving a young child and then all of a sudden you put a beautiful plate of food in front of it, he'll just eat it up. And since I was so starved for the first 17 years of my life, intellectually and spiritually, that when I got a mentor, I consumed everything this man taught me. He told me to listen to audio tapes. I'd listen to audio tapes. He told me to read books. I'd read books. I consumed everything. And I would then seek other mentors out in my life. And I've had the pleasure and blessing to have been mentored by some of the greatest coaches and some of the greatest thought leaders and business people that humanity has ever known. And, so as I've been so privileged to have these encounters with, such esteemed individuals, I've just been such a student that I've wanted to consume everything that they have to offer. And so there's a number of key individuals that were placed in my path that gave me, a complete boost in the direction that I was going in.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, at 17 years old, you hadn't had a mentor, your childhood had been traumatic and tumultuous. And at 17 years old, you're like a year away from leaving the house. What allowed you to gravitate toward this mentor?
Yeah.
It would have been so easy at this point, I think, at kind of the end of your teenage years, to dismiss this person, to say, you're not my dad, to say, what are you going to teach me? You're going to let me down like everybody else. I'm curious what it was about you, about him, about that moment that allowed for that convergence and that transformation.
Well, those thoughts did creep in, no doubt about it. But the thing that overrode those thoughts was, I saw this as my mother's Cinderella story. So I was in a gang. So it was much more comfortable for me to, be in my old environment than it was for me to be in this new environment with these rich kids in this rich neighborhood. And, and I had to cover up my gang tattoos, and I felt very uncomfortable in this wealthy environment because, it wasn't the environment that I had been accustomed to. But I, from a very spiritual standpoint, I was like, this is my mom's way out. Because I worried that my mom was going to get shot in a drive-by shooting. And I worried that the rival gangs would target her to get to me, because I was pretty smart, but she didn't have that street smarts built into her. So she could walk in front of a bullet very easily had they found out where I lived. And so I always had a deep fear of my mother's safety. I had friends that were shot. I had friends that were murdered. And so I was, that was a fear that I had, that my actions as a gang member were going to result in her being hurt. So when he showed up into my life, spiritually, I said, okay, I'm going to do my best to, to help my mother in this situation, and she refused to leave me behind. I tried to convince her and him to leave me the house that we were in, this little shack that we lived in, let me take it over, let me pay the rent. And, I dealt drugs at the time, so I could fathom paying the rent. And she said, no, I'm not leaving without you. And he then took me aside and said, I want to move your mom into my house. I'd seen his house, but she won't leave without you. And so I had really no choice but to either keep my mom in poverty and in great fear and great safety danger, or I had to make a choice to go with her. So I made that choice, and it was a difficult choice. I had hoped that it would be very short term, and it lasted only for about a year and a half. I was there from 17 to 19, about 17 and a half to about 19, a little over 19. So maybe about 2 years. So I wasn't there a long time, but in that 2 years, I got to see an entire different way of being and living. And then I made the choice that I wanted to create that existence for myself.
Was there a moment where you thought to yourself, I'm going to create this existence for myself, or was it deposits over time?
There was one big moment, and that was I was watching a documentary. So when I came into my stepdad's house, I just became a absolute hungry student. I wanted to read every book I could, learn everything this man knew. I went to college, started studying computer science. He insisted that I get a tutor because I'd only had freshman credits as a high schooler. And so now all of a sudden I'm in his house at 17. I have no chance of graduating. And he's like, we'll get you a tutor. And he had some rules in his house. I had to go to school, I had to have a job, and I couldn't bring girls into my room. Those were the 3 rules that he had. And so I had no choice but to follow these rules. And I agreed to those rules, and he supported me in them. And he said he'd help pay for my college. And I went to a community college at first. And he said he'd help pay for my tutor and even get me clothes to adopt from the gang uniform that I used to wear to being able to acclimate into college and into, a normal society, so to speak. So those were some of the key elements that lit the fire. But then there was a documentary that I watched called Pirates of the Silicon Valley. And the time that I was living with him was like 94 through 96. And I made a decision after watching that documentary that I was going to pursue technology. When I was in a gang, I had learned how to steal computers, reprogram computers. And that was my job basically in the gang. And, I loved computers. I'd stay up all night long, obsessing with how to reprogram them, and just became so fascinated by them. Then living in my stepfather's house and being his apprentice, he called me a boy Friday, but I'll call it an apprentice. I would repair his computers. And I saw how I had an aptitude for computers that he didn't even have. And I knew that computers were the future. And I watched as he reluctantly adopted this future. And I thought to myself, I want to go into computers. That was the field. So after watching that documentary, I had chills come all over me. I knew that I was going to do something, impactful as an entrepreneur. And I made a decision to actually leave my stepfather's house and leave his company to pursue a job in the computer industry. And that was the first job that I had. And it was at 19 years old that I started working at a company in a very low-level position. I joined their call center, making just over minimum wage. And I worked my way up from their call center into their data center, and from their data center into their software engineering group. And I worked my way up very quickly because I was 100% committed to learning and growing along in that organization. And it was a very entrepreneurial organization. So I got to see another model of entrepreneurship. And that then is what really inspired me to launch my own business.
Beautiful. And what was it like for you to launch your own business, right? I'm an entrepreneur now. We hear stories from entrepreneurs. It's the best, worst decision we ever made. It's the best, hardest thing we've ever done. Tell us a bit about your journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, I had no problem taking risk. So if we're to really break down why I've been successful, is I didn't have a problem taking risk. And the reason why I didn't have a problem taking risk is because I'd already taken tremendous risk, life and death risk my whole life. Being in a gang and being shot at, and being in the environment that I was in, and going to juvenile hall, like I was around real risk of survival consistently. So this wasn't risk of survival. This was risk of financial survival, but that to me was not nearly as scary as some of the other risks that I took. So I was willing to take the risk, but I did have to take a considerable risk. When I left the company that I worked for, it's called Logix. I was making $100,000 a year, which was substantial at that time, and certainly substantial for me because that was more than my father had ever made. I had bought my first house at the age of 21, maybe 20. And so, I had a mortgage, I had a car payment. I did this while I was going to school and while I was, had a full-time job going to college. But I just had this desire. I wanted to start this business. And so I took that risk and started the business. And that was probably the key hurdle that I had to overcome. Was I had to, I had to determine how much cash I had on hand, how much credit ability I had, just in case things didn't work out. I had to develop a plan for how I was going to generate revenue because I didn't want to lose my home and my car. And so I developed this plan. I created this strategy. And then, I took the leap basically into full-time entrepreneurship at around 20 years old. And I've been a full-time entrepreneur ever since. I'm 44 now, so I'm on 24 years in this journey.
You've been an entrepreneur longer than you haven't.
Yeah, now I haven't thought of it that way, but I have certainly, and that's why I've had a lot of early success in the startup that I'm doing now, is because I've just built upon values and principles and practices, and I reference experiences nonstop from the past, and so I might make it look a little easy, and that's primarily because I've always been willing to take the risk. And I've always been willing to bridge the gap. If I knew that this person had $1 million business and I didn't, I would do everything I could to extract the information from that person, read the books this person read, study the person inside and out, seek the person as my mentor. I had never had a problem closing gaps, and I never had a problem identifying the gaps.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, so many things that you're saying are so resonant for me. And one of them is, in the sort of concept of resilience that I am so passionate about and have spent, a decade and a half researching, is within the practice of possibility. I talk about there's no such thing as risk mitigation. It's all about how do we manage risk, right? Like we can never fully push out risk, right? And so it's not about mitigating risk, which is something that a lot of people talk about, but how do we manage knowing that risk is inherent, right, on our journey? And one of the things I loved about what you said is, and for me, this is one of the sort of latent, gifts of trauma, is like, if we sort of get through these times that are life and death, right? Then when we come out on the other side, it's like all the other stuff that kind of seems like a bigger deal to people who haven't been, in those moments. It's like,
Yeah.
I've seen worse. Right. And so it has this tremendous capacity to enhance our threshold and our ability to be, I don't know if I'd say comfortable, but, being comfortable, being uncomfortable in these moments of risk, because we know what it means to be in a life and death situation. And financial solvency can feel like that, but it's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. We can make it bigger than it is. There's many of times where I'd taken too much risk, and back to your point, we have to manage it because, there were times where I just didn't care. I just throw $1 million here, $1 million there, and not care because I just assumed I'll just make it back. And so I wasn't a good steward of money for a period of time because I took too much risk. So, there's a lot to be said for managing risk. And I think that's a brilliant aspect of what you teach in resiliency. But yeah, when you've gone through the battles that, that I have gone through, you become battle tested.
Mhm.
And then you start to see everything that comes your way as another battle. And eventually you wear your scars with pride. They're like badges that they give out in the military, or medals, I should say, that they give out in the military. It's like the scars and the wounds that I have. I'm proud of them because every one of them has tested me, as the soldier, using the analogy here, has tested me as a soldier that I am today.
Yeah. 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 I love that. It's being the soldier of our journey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And I tell people, if you met a warrior and they showed up with, all of these battles on them, they would be proud of those battles. They wouldn't be in shame of them. They wouldn't have a hard time. They'd say, yes, I've won this battle. I won that battle. I won this battle. And we need to see that with all of our trauma. Like, we should be showing up proud that I have, defeated the proverbial enemy, 100 times, and I'm alive today. Like, if people just were proud of the battles that they have faced and won, and I mean that even in the stuff that we have done to ourselves. Like,
sure.
when I work with addicts, right? It's like, you should be proud. You beat one of the hardest things to beat. Most people never beat this.
Mhm.
And you've done so, and you're alive and well, and you're ready to go, and you have so much potential and capacity. You shouldn't be ashamed of your past. You should be like excited that you overcome one of the hardest challenges that there is to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think we don't do that, or what sort of stands in the way of us getting to celebrate these battles?
Well, number one, society shames you. So society, and this is, one day when I help influence public office and things like that as I progress in my journey.
May it be so.
Yeah, may it be so, right? It is a terrible thing that we live in a gossiping culture, that our media is tearing down people, that, social media is tearing down people. It's an absolute terrible thing that we live in a culture that our society believes that we should tear people down, and that we should expose their shortcomings, and that we should condemn them and hold them in shame. And we do that when a person declares bankruptcy. We do that when a person loses their house. We do that when a person goes through a divorce. We do that when a person attempts a great feat in entrepreneurship and fails. You have thousands of people that are lined up to try to tear you down. And so as a result of that, they are literally casting a spell upon you to hold you into grief and into shame and into guilt and into apathy and into fear. And it's all because of the way society has been constructed to try to control its constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for you to truly be free of that control, you have to proudly wear your journey, your heart on your sleeve.
And is there something about that, Ryan, do you think, that's programmed, that's like unconscious programming, if you will, like within us or within society, where it, maybe something akin, you tell me what you think, right? But maybe something akin to, I'll just say a side note, I'm really passionate about a number of these things, but one of these things that I'm really passionate about is the permutation of this that women engage in, right? And the way that we, I'll say collectively, are competitive with each other, rather than seeing an accomplished, successful woman as like, that's my co-collaborator, that's the person I'm going to go and learn from. We say that's my competition and I'm going to tear her down, tangentially, right? Like, I'm still bullied on my son's playground. I don't go to elementary school anymore. They go to elementary school. But the other moms look at me and the way that I look and my height and my accomplishments, and they circle up and they whisper and they say mean things and they refuse to invite me to things, right? So this is just a microcosm, right, of the way this unconscious programming, I think, in society works around this notion of shame. And I wonder if there's something about, we're all afraid to fail. We're all afraid to lose our house, our livelihood, our relationship, right? The things that you shared, but maybe in that moment of holding someone down, we believe that somehow it inoculates us from going through that. Like if I keep you down, then that somehow elevates me or is a protective factor for, look at you. This keeps the spotlight from shining on me. What do you think?
Well, negativity.
Why does this occur?
Yeah, no, you're spot on, but I'll give your theory in another way.
I love it.
Negativity attracts negativity. Mm-hmm. And so the more negative I have in me, the more negative I project, right? And so, the more positivity I have in me, the more positivity I project. And our society is just on a negative energetic cycle. And it's accumulated over many generations. Mm-hmm. And there's just this massive amount of negative energy that is unconscious. People do not realize that they're perpetuating negativity, that they're harming and they're hurting people, that the very words coming out of their mouth are casting spells upon good people. Mm-hmm. They just don't understand it. And so, it's the fact that we have an unconscious society. And you're absolutely right. It does feel good when you have not realized your full potential to try to limit someone else from realizing theirs. Mm-hmm. The lower vibrational individual will always try to pull down the higher vibrational individual. And as higher vibrational individuals, we have to try to pull up the lower vibrational individuals. There's been an awakening that's occurring where more people have awakened to higher levels of consciousness, where, we can truly live a positive life filled with joy, happiness, love, light, and beauty. We don't have to live a life filled with gossip and grief and shame and apathy and some of the lower vibrational energies. But this is a new paradigm shift in humanity that we are at the very beginning of. It is, although it seems like it's been around for a while, if you think about the work on consciousness, and you as a doctor know this better than I, this is just emerging in the past 100 or so years. So we've had thousands of years worth of, dark actions that are now starting to get some light shined upon them. And it might take another 1,000 years for us to truly develop to a level of consciousness where we're no longer being operated by these lower vibrational energies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's profound. That's profound.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, as you think about the 5 practices of particularly resilient people and that work, and I know this concept of resilience is one of many that's fascinated you, and you've read on it from a variety of different sources. Is there a particular practice for you that, as you think about your trajectory of facing challenge, change, and complexity in your own healing, that really resonates for you?
Yeah, I'll give you a quote that I learned a long time ago that is in alignment with yours, and it's that legends are made of vulnerable men. And I heard this quote, and we can say vulnerable people, but I heard this quote, legends are made of vulnerable men, when I was a kid. And I made a decision that I wanted to be legendary through my vulnerability. And that has been the secret ingredient to my success. Both of my books, I was very vulnerable in. I shared, vulnerably where I was at. My documentary that I did, and I'm filming another one now. The work that I do at Altar Call, the tributes that I paid to my transitioned relatives. Today's my mother's birthday. Everything I try to do is to embody vulnerability. So I would say vulnerability, and really embodying that, is the gateway to joy and happiness. Because if you think about vulnerability, for me to be a good singer, I have to be vulnerable. I have to sing terribly in front of other people, and I have to be willing to withstand their judgment and their criticism, them laughing at me, and them telling me I will never be a good singer. But I have to do that in the face of knowing that this criticism is coming, and it has, believe me, because I've tried to practice my voice throughout the 2-year journey. And there's been times where I've seen people not laughing with me, but laughing at me. And that's part of the journey. But the more that I'm willing to step out and be vulnerable, the better I will become at this skill of singing. And then eventually I will have pure joy and happiness as I'm able to sing and transfer that skill and talent onto others. And so vulnerability is the gateway to joy and happiness. And, but it takes resilience to be vulnerable and to do so in spite of rejection and in spite of, of how society might very well criticize you for being vulnerable.
Right.
The other practice that really jumps out to me is, as you combine the words, and you'll have to say it, it's gratitude and generosity. How do you say it?
Gratiosity.
Gratiosity. So gratiosity is, I think it's a beautiful combination of the words. And, gratitude is a fundamental practice that I utilize every single day. And generosity, whenever I'm dealing with people that are challenged by what's going on energetically, I tell them to do a random act of kindness. Generosity is the secret to changing the energy that is flowing in your direction. And those are foundational. I've always been tremendously grateful to the divine, to the universe. And I've always had that in me. And then every time I've ever had any level of success, I've always paid it forward and given back. And I continue, even when I'm not having a tremendous amount of success, paying it forward and giving it back.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's this incredible element of gratiosity, and it's been so fun to be studying this for the last decade and a half, and to watch these practices develop and unfurl in a way and continue to gain more color and more context. And one of the most beautiful elements of gratiosity is this notion of getting to tell, what I like to call our resilient story, right? And that the telling of our resilient story isn't just for ourselves, right? And so this notion of, life is lived forwards, but understood, looking backwards or in retrospect. So the first part of gratiosity is being able to look on a challenge, which you have done so adeptly as you think about how you characterize your childhood, and be able to see the beautiful mess, or be able to look on a challenge, even if you wouldn't have chosen the circumstances, and to be able to see the gratitude in that moment. And then from there, to be able to crystallize that story and share it generously with the world, not just for our own benefit of finding our voice, giving voice to our experience, but with the idea that people will get to learn those lessons vicariously. People known or unknown to us will be impacted by the sharing of our story in, amplified and positive ways.
Sharing is one of the most important things that we can do. It is my belief that each of us has a near identical purpose, and that is to learn something. We've come here to learn something, transform into something even greater than what we showed up as, and then to leave behind the wisdom that we have obtained, right? That's our legacy. And so if each of us are on the exact same journey, right? We're here to learn something, transform, and leave behind wisdom, then the way we leave behind that wisdom is by sharing. And so I agree with you 100%. From a spiritual standpoint, I feel that I am required to share, and I'm required to share vulnerably. And when I do so, I see the change that it creates in other people's hearts. When I talk about forgiving my father, when I talk about my love toward my mother, when I talk about, the difficult times, not only does it help heal me because I'm now creating greater clarity in the meaning of those times. And when I write about those times, I, better articulate and receive greater clarity in them, but it also helps heal others. And that creates more meaning. And so I can tell you, I've been through some terrible things I would not have chosen, but because I've chosen to share those things, I now can say that because I went through a custody battle, I've now helped, many men go through custody battles. Because I have gone through trauma, I've now helped many people go through their trauma. So yes, I wouldn't go back and choose the exact same challenges that I've encountered in my journey. But I'm grateful for the challenges because of what I've gone through, I've helped others, many others go through, many great challenges as well. And so I have no regrets for the story I've been through. And to even further that, like I see the universe as a great storyteller. And so, I rejoice in the fact that I'm so blessed to have a great story to tell.
Great story to tell amidst the great storyteller of the universe.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's like I see the storytelling playing out in my own journey, and so I'm just, I'm like, wow, how cool! Like I'm on this heroic journey of transforming into a person, and yes, it's my journey has been shared with a small amount of people, and and so that's beautiful. But if each of us just shares our heroic journey, our hero's journey with the people that we're capable of sharing it with, then we'll manufacture a tremendous amount of heroes out there, and we'll start telling better stories in our society. And when we start telling better stories in our society, we will literally change it.
I love that. Start telling better stories in our society and we will change it. That's powerful.
Thank you.
Closing out our time together, Ryan, tell us about Altar Call. You've got a painting, I believe, of Jesus and the Last Supper behind you.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
Da Vinci? Is that Da Vinci's?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one with the M in it. Yeah. And then you've studied, as you mentioned, right? Like a tremendous array of spiritual practices, from Hinduism to Buddhism to Kabbalah. Talk to us about Altar Call. And Altar Call, by the way, has such a tremendously fond place in my heart, because the first time we met, I remember I walked in, it was like whiteboarded, and you had just sort of finished a visioning and a strategy session. And it's been such a joy to see this vision that was once on a whiteboard, come to life, certainly before my very eyes. It's got to be incredibly exciting before yours.
It's been a 2-year journey, and it's been beautiful. And when you shared that with me right now, I just have to tell you how blessed it is, because there's very few people that actually, witness your first whiteboarding session. And as divine timing, the timing was so divine that you walked in right as I'd completed it. And, and that became a framework and a structure that we've just worked to execute on ever since. And Altar Call really stands for a call to change. It's not an altar as though you're kneeling before and praying before an altar. It's an altar as though an alteration. And so we help people alter their lives so that they can answer their calling, literally fulfill their purpose. And we're a spiritual group, but we accept all spiritualities. But each and every single one of us has a level of faith and a higher power driving our behaviors and our beliefs and our actions that we take. And we focus on leaders and entrepreneurs. And so we have about 200 leaders and entrepreneurs that we've been mentoring to bring the modalities that I spoke of earlier, bring the principles and practices and the wisdom into their organizations, to create organizations that make an impact, and organizations that spread consciousness into their local communities. And I can proudly say that we have 150 nurses on the front line in one of our organizations. We have people that are helping people buy their homes for the very first time in our organization. We have nonprofits. So Altar Call is a community of entrepreneurs that are seeking to make the world a better place, better than we found it, and driving home the principles and practices that I've learned on my journey as an entrepreneur.
Totally incredible. I love seeing this come to life.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun. And during the pandemic, we had to, we went through a challenging time because we were doing events in person, but that's when we started developing our virtual approach. And, since forming Altar Call, we've helped over 20,000 people on their meditation journey. We've helped thousands of people on their breathwork journeys. And, and every single day we just plug at it more. I have a team of about 13 full-time people on the inside of the walls and about 200 people on the outside of the walls, developing and building this platform. And over time, I definitely have a vision for this platform, making an impact in a tremendous amount of lives.
I 1000% see it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So today is your mom's birthday.
Yeah.
And one of the intentions that we set for this time together was to honor her life, to allow her to be present in this time with us, and for there to be a sense of aliveness of her spirit and the impact that she's had on you, and also to go deep together. How would you like to mark this time? Or is there something that you'd like to ask for, or an intention you'd like to put out to the universe, or a gratitude that you'd like to share? What emerges for you as you think about how you might like to make her even more present, overtly present than she has been?
You bring tears to my eyes with this question. When my mother was transitioning, I went to her bedside and I grabbed her hand and I told her the struggles that I had been facing while she was ill for 7 years. I told her about, doing drugs and being promiscuous. I told her about, a lot of the stuff. I confessed. And then I told her, as you transition, I won't do this stuff anymore because you're going to be in the room with me watching every step of the way. And there's no way I could have done this stuff in front of you, Mom. And she kind of smiled and she's like, you're right, I will be in the room every step of the way. And we made a deal in that moment that she was going to elevate with grace and I was going to then be free to become the leader I was destined to be. And so in this moment, I'll tell you and my mom, like, we're doing it. The oath that we made out of blood at her bedside is being enacted in this very moment. And so I thank you for having me on today to be able to pay tribute to her on this very special day. And I'm just so grateful that I have her guiding me. I feel her presence. I hear her voice. I'll smell her perfume. And I'm just consumed with the amount of love that I have for her, especially on today.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I feel her with us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, she taught me love. My father taught me forgiveness, and through forgiveness, I now have a tremendous amount of love. His birthday was yesterday. Her birthday is today. And so I've had 48 hours of deep reflection and contemplation. And so I've been excited about this interview because it's an opportunity for me to share that deep reflection and contemplation that I've spent the past 48 hours engaging in.
Thank you. That's so beautiful, Ryan. So incredible. You're such a beautiful soul. It's such a pleasure to know you. It's such a wonder to get to watch and observe and appreciate your contributions to the world.
Oh, thank you. I receive that. That is a beautiful thing to hear for you as well. And, the work that you've done is inspiring. And I have no doubt watching, when you first came to the house, you were just making the transition to entrepreneurship. And so I was just starting this thing called Altar Call, and you were just leaving corporate America. And, we're on this journey together. And it's just a privilege to call you a friend.
1,000%. 1,000%. I feel the exact same way. Ryan, I know there's so many people who are listening to this episode who are going to be excited about connecting with you, learning more about Altar Call, wanting to know how they can connect with you, read your books, follow you on Instagram. Tell us about where folks can find you and be a part of your mission and vision for the more beautiful world and society.
The best way to find me is on Instagram. I will, if you DM me, I'll get right back to you. It's at Real Ryan Blair on Instagram. And then if you want, you could also go to altercall.com, and that's ALTERCALL.com.
Woo! such wonderful things happening. Ryan, thank you for your time today, for your wisdom, for your grace, for your insight, for your vulnerably sharing so much of your hero's journey and continuing on your path toward being that vulnerable legend. It's an honor and a pleasure to be a small part of your journey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to making an impact with you.
Me too.